This is Brad Carmack, author of Homosexuality, a straight BYU student's perspective. It's available for you for free download at bradcarmack.blogspot.com. If you'd like to purchase a copy, you may email me at homosexualityperspective@yahoo.com. In this video, we're going to address the claim that homosexuals can reproduce. The reason I kind of separate this from related content is that the ideal is novel, the idea, and kind of eyebrow-raising to most people. Aren't really aware that homosexual-oriented people can reproduce with those of the same gender, and also because the concept is very important and bears on questions such as same-sex marriage. So the most common idea that's thrown out is that homosexual couples can't reproduce. You need a sperm and an egg, and same-sex couples have either 2 sperms, 1 per partner, or 2 eggs, 1 per partner. And so the claim is that they can't reproduce, and oftentimes that's used as a basis for excluding them from marriage. I will address that. I'm going to present a few situations where it is in fact feasible for same-sex couples to reproduce and to be the biological parents of a child, including a few scenarios where they are the only biological parents of a child. And then we're going to kind of address the fertility arguments in a little bit more depth. Okay, so the first argument, some say that they can't reproduce together, and so kind of have to get a consensus on what terms are being used here, such as reproduction, and what it means to have the potential to reproduce. So if you've got DNA is the main unit of inheritance, that's what we inherit from our parents. It's what we pass on to our children. So let's say that you take a gay couple, and the gay couple mix their sperm, and they use that mixed sperm to fertilize a donated egg, and then a good friend of theirs, who's a female, acted as a surrogate. Well, we've got the egg donated, and then we've also got the sperm that came from one of the 2 men. If they mix it, they wouldn't know right off which one of their sperm it was. So the question here is the DNA contribution by the partners sufficient to make them biological parents? And depending upon the answer to that question, then of course the conclusion is that gay men can reproduce together if you find a way to use both of their genes or DNA to create a new person. So let's take another scenario here. Let's say you've got partner A of a lesbian couple, so 2 women, takes the nucleus out of the oocyte or egg of partner B. Okay, so you got partner B's egg, you take out the nucleus, and you put in a nucleus from partner A. And then you take a donated sperm and fertilize that egg. Well, the resulting offspring will be genetically related to both lesbian parents. So one of the lesbian parents provided genetic material that was inherited by the child to the mitochondria. The second one contributed genetic material that was used by the child through the nucleus, and then the rest of the genetic material that was needed came from the donated sperm. So we've got a couple examples here so far of homosexuals reproducing. Of course, the most common way for homosexuals to reproduce is by having sexual intercourse with an individual of the opposite sex, which of course they are just as capable of, or at least almost as capable of, as are heterosexual-oriented people. So there's a couple other scenarios here that I'd like to paint. First, I'd like to address the biological underpinnings of some of these scenarios. All the instructions needed to make a human egg are contained in a cell from a swab of my cheek, meaning that females have all the same chromosomes up except for that last sex chromosome, which is either XX for women or XY for men. Well, in women, that second X is just kind of curled up in a bar body that's not used. So she's only relying upon that first X and the first 42 chromosomes as far as the library for the genetic material she needs to synthesize an egg from her tissues. Well, I have those same genes. I have a Y on that last one, but I have the X that precedes it, which is all that the woman uses to create an egg. So you could take one of my somatic or body cells, like from a cheek swab, and with the right hormone cocktail, you could create an egg that came entirely from the genetic material in one of my cells. Now there's a similar situation, but not exactly the same amongst females, meaning that almost all, if not all, of the genetic instructions needed to create a human sperm are found in the genetic material of one of the body cells of a female. There are a couple genes that seems to be that are important for making a sperm or spermatogenesis, which are found on the Y chromosome. That would be easy to substitute for by just mimicking the gene product or the protein, but there would be a little bit of a difference there. Also, if you took an egg that came from me, and let's say that I had a male partner, and a sperm from him and united them, we would be capable of being the two and only two biological parents of both boys and girls. The comparable situation with a lesbian couple, they could only have girls. As you recall, there needs to be a Y chromosome in order to have a boy. Since women possess only X chromosomes, that wouldn't be as feasible for them. Now one might argue and say, well, you still need to have a womb. Having merely a zygote, a union of egg and sperm, is insufficient. One needs to have gestation and a womb to grow the zygote in as it goes through fetal development. That is true, and so if you consider gestation to be part of or sufficient for defining a parent, then indeed the surrogate, if you had two gay men reproducing, would be the third parent. However, it is feasible to have an artificial womb. Part of the components of the artificial womb are already functioning and employed. For instance, the extracorporeal membrane oxygenation is a functioning technique that's used with neonatal intensive care units of very early prematurely born babies. There's also a dialysis technique which can be used to take away waste products that are generated during gestation that is functioning. There is a substance called lactated Ringer's solution, which could be used as a substitute for amniotic fluid. So a fully artificial womb is not a reality yet, but parts of it are, and the feasibility merely needs a little bit of technological assistance before it arrives, in which case even those that would say gestating is part of being a parent, once that's eliminated, you can have an artificial womb, then you would have a gay couple, same sex, where they are the two and only two biological parents of a child. Okay, so another scenario, you could take one of my sperm, let's say that I had a same-sex partner, and one of his sperm, and you could fuse the two, and then you could put the resulting diploid nucleus in an enucleated totipotent cell from one of the men. So you took a cheek swab from me, you took out the nucleus, you gave it a hormone cocktail such that it becomes a totipotent cell, which means it can develop into any of the tissue types of the body, from bone cells to liver cells to sperm, etc. If you were to place a diploid nucleus that came from fusing my sperm and a sperm of my partner together, then you would have an egg that could, well, I guess a totipotent cell that could develop into a human person that would be genetically distinct from either me or my partner, but would be the offspring of both of us. So that's another scenario that shows that same-sex couples can reproduce. Another scenario, let's say you took the nucleus of a lesbian partner's egg and fused that nucleus to that of the egg of her partner. So again, this is another way to get a diploid nucleus. And then you could put that diploid nucleus into the egg, the enucleated egg of one of the two, or you could derive a totipotent cell that's functionally equivalent to an oocyte by other means, and then you would again have a child with two and only two biological parents of the same sex. Now I realize I went a bit fast there. You're welcome to look at the references and the explanation in a little bit more detail at your leisure in my book. But in the face of the bottom line is, with these biological possibilities, it seems that the real crux of being able to reproduce is possessing all the inheritable material necessary for procreation. And if that indeed is the standard, then homosexually oriented people that are in the same sex, that are a couple, are no more nor less capable of reproducing than an opposite sex couple, because they both between them have all of the genetic material necessary to reproduce. Okay, so that's an important point, and why that's the reason I bring it out as its own chapter. Now, there's some related questions and discussion that go along with this ability to reproduce. Oftentimes, the inability to reproduce has been relied on as a discriminator to prohibit same-sex couples from marrying while allowing opposite-sex couples the same privilege. And oftentimes the argument is made that opposite-sex couples can reproduce, and even if they're sterile, that they naturally could reproduce, and that there is no potential or inherent ability of a same-sex couple to reproduce. As we've shown, as far as being inherent, possessing genetic material that's inheritable is the best basis we have for judging whether or not the potential is inherent, and therefore there is no difference between a sterile opposite-sex couple and a same-sex couple as to their ability to reproduce, meaning that, sorry, pick up from where we left off there, that both of them have the ability to reproduce with the assistance of reproductive technology, and they are no different in their ability to do so, possessing all the inheritable material necessary for that end. Okay, one of the responses here is to say, well, sure, if you pick a heterosexual couple at random, they're going to be able to reproduce. There are a few examples, the older couple or the sterile couple, but by and large, they're going to be capable of reproduction. But if you look at homosexual couples, none of them can. Well, there's two responses. First is they can, as shown earlier, and second of all, there's no real use of zooming out enough that you can pick any heterosexual couple and they can on average reproduce, but not zooming in enough to capture whether or not that couple is sterile or old. So if you look at all those that are postmenopausal, they're no more nor less capable of reproduction than a homosexual couple that are same-sex. And if you're willing to look in and see whether they're heterosexual or homosexual, meaning, or I guess more specifically, if they're opposite or same-sex, and if they're sterile or not sterile, and if they're old or not old, which is essentially a question of if they're fertile or not fertile, it just makes no sense to discriminate marriage access based on your fertility unless you're going to exclude all non-fertile persons and include all fertile persons. So the postmenopausal woman who goes to the courthouse to get her marriage certificate should be laughed out of the courthouse for making a mock of marriage, since she's not capable of reproduction. There would be no tenable reason that's not arbitrary to allow her to marry while not allowing a same-sex couple to marry. At least no arguments that I have thus far seen. There's a quote here that kind of summarizes this here. I kind of mentioned already about the going to the courthouse, but let's look at another one in regards to elderly couples. There seems to be a trend of remarriage among the elderly. In fact, marriage amongst the elderly is already a popular internet topic as well as a popular media subject, and this trend promises to increase since the elderly population is increasing. The elderly population is increased by a factor of 11, and I think it's between 1990 and 1994, and the total population only tripled in the same amount of time. And it looks like the number of elderly will increase to 80 million in the next century. So certainly the population of sterile couples that are opposite sex, as characterized by their age, is on the rise. So the question is, if fertility is vital to marriage access, will those people, to be fair, be excluded? Let's see. Alright, so you got a man and a woman marrying. After they've been married for a couple years, if the man loses fertility, say that he has cancer of the vas deferens or something, I would ask, should the wife try to fulfill the purpose of marriage, which is, has been asserted by some as reproduction, and leave him for a fertile man, and either that or should she stay with him but cancel their marriage? This kind of illustrates the trouble in tying reproduction as a necessary part of marriage. I think Valerie Hudson, she's an LDS feminist author, put it best when she described that reproduction is the fruit, not the root of marriage. And I think, like Judge Walker, she concluded that it's the formation of a household, of that partnership, that is the core of marriage. And whether or not a sterile couple is considered a marriage or not is really beside the point, is I think the argument she made, and I think it is a strong one. Okay. Also, it may become more feasible in the future to have more and more children born outside the womb and or conceived outside the womb, and as long as there is accommodation made for sterile opposite-sex couples through reproductive technologies and no limiting of access to marriage for them, it does seem unfair to limit access to marriage to same-sex couples purportedly on that same reason of inability to reproduce, when in fact there are opposite-sex couples that are unable to reproduce that are not so excluded.